The night air was sharp, carrying with it the faint tang of coal smoke and the sweet, earthy scent of roasted chestnuts drifting from another stall nearby. It was December in Manchester, sometime in the mid-1980s, when the Arndales still felt new and the Christmas markets stretched out like a glittering maze of fairy lights, their glow softening the chill of the city's grey stone. My breath rose in little clouds as I joined the queue at a small wooden hut, its sign hand-painted with the words "Hot Jacket Potatoes." The glass panes were fogged with steam, and behind them sat a great silver oven where foil-wrapped potatoes hissed and split, their skins crisped, dark and shiny. The man serving wore a thick wool jumper under his apron, his cheeks ruddy from standing close to the heat. He reached in with metal tongs and plucked out a steaming potato, then deftly split it open with a small knife. I watched, mesmerized, as he scooped a dollop of butter into the crack, the golden fat melting instantly, running into the pale, fluffy middle. A squeeze of grated cheese followed, then a pinch of salt. The aroma was overwhelming. Nutty, rich, the smell of earth and warmth, cut through by the faint metallic tank of foil. I cradled the parcel in my gloved hands, feeling the warmth seep into my palms through the thin wool. Around me, the market hum stalls, selling trinkets, hand-knit scarves, and sugared almonds. Buskers with guitars strumming half-familiar tunes. Children tugging at their parents, their cheeks pink with cold. Somewhere in the distance, a brass band was playing carols, their notes slightly off-key but joyous all the same. The sound bounced off the wet cobblestones, which glistened in the light of the hanging bulbs strung between the huts. Taking the first bite was always a ritual. The skin crackled slightly under the fork, giving way to the soft center that carried a sweetness only long baking could bring. The butter dripped down onto the foil, hissing faintly as it met the heat of the potato. My breath fogged the air as I blew gently on the steaming forkful, then finally tasted it. It was comfort made, solid, simple, hearty, satisfying. A kind of food that asked for no ceremony, only appreciation. Next to me, an older woman was eating hers with baked beans spooned into the middle, the sauce staining the potato a vivid orange. She smiled at me, eyes crinkling, and said, "Best way to keep warm, love," before disappearing into the crowd with her foil-wrapped treasure. That was the thing about jacket potatoes. Back then they weren't fancy, but they were shared. Not in the literal sense, but in the way everyone recognized them as a treat for the soul on a biting winter evening. A memory flickered of home. My mum baking them in the oven, the smell filling the whole kitchen. It would take nearly an hour, sometimes more, and we'd hover impatiently, lifting the oven door now and then to check. She'd insist they had to be cooked slowly, so the skin toughened just enough and the center went fluffy. When they finally emerged, we'd slice them open and watch the steam rise, pouring beans or cheese into the hollow, just as the stallholder had done. Even at home, they carried the same warmth of the market food that didn't just fill your stomach, but your spirit too. The potato in my hand was vanishing quickly, every forkful swallowed faster than the last as the cold bit harder. My fingers grew greasy where butter leaked through the foil, and I licked them clean without shame. The salt lingered on my lips, sharp and comforting. Overhead, the lights twinkled faintly against a low-hanging Manchester sky, heavy with the promise of more rain. There was a small moment then, as I leaned against the side of the hut, when everything slowed. The chatter of voices blurred into a hum, the brass band swelled into a softer backdrop, and the heat of the potato radiated through me like a secret hearth. A boy walked past holding his mum's hand, his cheeks dusted with sugar from a bag of doughnuts. And for a second he looked at my potato with wide eyes. I caught his glance and smiled, holding it up as if to say, "This is the real prize tonight." His mother laughed, tugging him along, but he turned back once, grinning. It was only a glance, a shared smile between strangers, but it carried a warmth that no December frost could touch. That is what winter markets in England often were in the 80s gatherings, not just of people, but of small, ordinary comforts stitched together. A pint in a nearby pub after a long week, a wool scarf scratchy against your neck, a song you half knew carried by the wind, and sometimes, most simply, a jacket potato eaten under fairy lights. Steam rising into the fog while life unfolded around you. By the time I reached the last bite, the foil was crumpled and slick with butter. My gloves dangerously stained. I folded it neatly, slipped it into a bin that overflowed with other foil parcels, and brushed my hands against my coat. The night was no less cold, the drizzle no less persistent. But I was changed by that small meal, fortified, anchored, ready to walk back through the winding streets toward home. As I stepped out of the market, the sounds shifted less of brass and chatter, more of car engines and footsteps echoing under railway bridges. The city beyond awaited, restless and alive. And just a few corners away, another flavour of the 80s was waiting. One that carried a different kind of warmth altogether. The pavement outside the nightclub was slick with rain, reflecting neon streaks from the sign above like liquid fire. It was Birmingham, 1984, and the night air was thick with the mingled scents of cigarette smoke, damp concrete, and something spicier cumin, garlic, and charred meat drifting from the kebab shop at the corner. My ears still rang with the last throb of the disco. Donna Summer's voice echoing faintly in memory. The bass line still pulsing in my chest, as though it hadn't yet realized the music was over. We spilled out onto Broad Street, laughter bubbling up as our heels clicked against the wet stones. My friends were flushed with dancing, coats hanging loose, scarves trailing behind as we wove our way past other revelers. Everyone seemed to be heading in the same direction, the glow of the takeaway sign, buzzing faintly with electricity, promising warmth and grease and something to hold in our hands before the long bus ride home. Inside the shop, the world shifted. The glass steamed over instantly as bodies pressed close, a damp haze clouding the fluorescent-lit room. The counter gleamed with condensation, and behind it, a great rotating spit of doner meat turned slowly, glistening with fat. The hiss of the grill underscored the crackle of oil, and the man behind the counter moved with practiced efficiency, knife flashing as he shaved thin ribbons of meat into a waiting tray. He barely looked up as he asked, chili, garlic, both, in a tone that suggested there was only one correct answer. We nodded, always both. The sauces were part of the ritual. Sharp garlic that clung to your breath for hours, fiery chili that made your lips sting and your eyes water. He slapped open a round of warm pita, spooned in a heap of shredded lettuce and onions, then piled on the meat. Sauce was drizzled in great, careless strokes before the whole thing was wrapped in paper and slid across the counter. The moment it hit my hands, everything changed. The heat seeped through the thin wrapping, thawing my fingers that had grown stiff in the night air. We jostled our way outside again, clutching our parcels like prizes. On the corner, under the dim glow of a street lamp, we huddled together to eat. Rain misted against our cheeks, catching the light as cars whooshed past, their tires hissing on the wet road. The first bite was always messy meat tumbling out, sauce dripping down wrists, a crunch of lettuce giving way to soft bread and smoky lamb. My mouth burned with chili, soothed instantly by the creamy garlic. A chaotic symphony of taste that no one ever bothered to eat politely. We laughed at each other's stained shirts, tugged at napkins too flimsy to help, wiped our hands on jeans already damp from the night. There was a strange intimacy to it, standing in the cold, half drunk and tired, yet bound by the ritual of greasy food at ungodly hours. A girl I barely knew nudged my arm with hers, eyes glinting under the street lamp, as she handed me a chip she'd stolen from someone else's tray. I took it without hesitation, our fingers brushing for a fleeting second, and we grinned, like conspirators, before the moment dissolved back into the laughter of the group. Looking back, those kebabs were never gourmet. The meat was often a little too salty. The bread sometimes torn before you reached the middle. The sauce guaranteed to leave a stain. But none of that mattered. At 2 in the morning, with legs aching from dancing and ears still ringing, it felt like the finest meal you could ever hope for. It was fuel, comfort, and celebration all at once, eaten against the backdrop of a city that seemed to never quite sleep. I remember one particular night when the rain grew heavier, pelting down in sheets that blurred the streetlights into golden smears. We ducked into the narrow doorway of a closed shop, pressed shoulder to shoulder as we tried to keep our food dry. The smell of warm bread and hot meat filled the little alcove, battling the dampness of wet coats. Someone started humming the last song we danced to. Never gone, nah, give you up. New then, still just a chart hit before it became immortal and we all joined in. Our voices rough and tuneless but full of joy. The shop front rattled faintly as a bus roared past, but inside that little corner we were cocooned by music, laughter, and the steady rhythm of chewing. When the food was gone, we wiped our hands on the crumpled paper, dropping it into bins that overflowed with others just like it. The warmth lingered in our stomachs, a shield against the walk to the bus stop. The city felt different, then emptier, softer. Rain had washed the pavements clean, and the neon signs flickered weakly against the thinning crowd. We huddled together, scarves pulled tight, still joking, still laughing, the night not yet ready to end. There's a certain kind of nostalgia that clings to food like that, not because it was the best we'd ever eaten, but because it was tied to a time when everything felt endless, when the night stretched on forever and the smallest rituals carried the greatest meaning. Kebabs after the disco weren't just about hunger, they were about togetherness, about the way shared messiness becomes memory, about how a bite of food can hold a whole evening within it. As the bus pulled in, headlights sweeping across wet tarmac, we clambered aboard, voices hushed now, exhaustion settling in. The paper wrappings were gone, but the garlic still lingered on our breath, the chili still burned faintly on our lips. The city blurred past in streaks of light, and I thought to myself that no matter how many nights like this we had, I would always remember the taste of that first bite on the corner of Broad Street, rain in the air and laughter on our tongues. And just a few stops away, another flavour of the 80s awaited one, with sweetness at its heart, carried by a melody floating down suburban streets. The tannoy crackled overhead, its clipped announcement echoing against the iron rafters of King's Cross Station. It was late afternoon in the winter of 1986, the kind of day when the London sky seemed fixed in a shade of pewter, and the air carried a chill that sank into your bones. The concourse bustled with travellers, footsteps echoing on the stone floor, suitcases rattling over uneven tiles. Trains hissed and sighed at the platforms, clouds of steam rising like tired exhalations, and somewhere amid the rush, the smell of pastry floated, a buttery, savoury warmth that cut through the metallic temps of oil and diesel. The Cornish pasty stall was tucked just beside platform 7, its counter lit by a yellow bulb that threw a soft glow over the glass case. Inside, golden half-moon shapes sat in neat rows, their crimped edges browned just so, each one promising a pocket of heat against the cold station air. The sign above was painted in fading red, the kind of lettering that already looked dated even then. But the queue was proof enough of its draw. Office clerks in wool coats, families tugging along children, students with rucksacks all waiting for the same thing, a warm parcel to carry with them on the journey ahead. When it was my turn, the woman behind the counter slipped a pasty into a small paper bag, grease spots already appearing as she folded the top. The warmth radiated instantly, seeping into my chilled hands. The bag crackled faintly as I clutched it, weaving my way through the tide of passengers. I found a place near the iron pillar at the edge of the platform, the air filled with the sound of pigeons flapping overhead and the shrill whistle of a guard calling final boarding. I opened the bag, the steam rising to cloud my glasses for a moment. The pastry flaked under my fingers, scattering golden crumbs onto my lapel. Inside was the familiar mix: tender beef, diced potato, slivers of onion, a hint of turnip, all seasoned with pepper. The first bite was molten, rich, almost too hot to eat, but it didn't matter. It tasted of comfort, of something older than the station itself. Around me, the station was alive with stories. A man in a trilby unwrapped his pasty as his wife carefully checked their tickets. A group of teenagers laughed as they tried to share 2 pasties between 4 of them, tearing them clumsily in half, the filling spilling out onto their gloves. A child sat cross-legged on the floor, holding a pasty almost as big as her hands, biting carefully around the edges. The food seemed to tie us all together in that moment. Strangers bound by the simple ritual of hot pastry eaten in transit. I thought about Cornwall then, about how the pasty had been made for miners. Easy to hold in coal-blackened hands, the crimped edge sometimes discarded so the rest could be eaten clean. That history lingered in every bite, even here in London, even as trains thundered north to York or Edinburgh. The pasty carried a memory of labour, of sustenance, but also of home, something that clung even in the impersonal vastness of a station concourse. The wind swept in as a train pulled away, cold air rushing down the platform, carrying with it the sharp temps of coal smoke mixed with pastry steam. I pulled my coat tighter, shielding the little bag like it was treasure. A man passing by glanced at it, his stomach audibly growling, and for a second we exchanged a knowing smile, the silent bond of 2 people who understood the small pleasure of warm food on a cold day. As I ate, there was that fleeting moment of intimacy, as though the station, for all its clamour, had slowed around me. The announcement boards clacked as new destinations flickered into place. Voices rose and fell, but in my hand was something still and grounding. Each bite left my fingers greasier, crumbs tumbling down onto the stone at my feet, where pigeons darted eagerly. The pepper tingled at the back of my throat, chased by the buttery sweetness of the pastry. I finished just as the train guard blew his whistle, the shrill sound slicing through the air. Folding the empty bag, I slipped it into my coat pocket, not wanting to let go of its faint warmth just yet. Around me, people surged forward, bags bumping against legs, coats brushing in the tight press toward the carriages. I joined them, feeling steadier somehow, fortified by that humble pasty. On the platform, the wind swirled again, tugging at scarves and newspapers. A young couple stood close, sharing a pasty between them, their fingers meeting as they tore the crust. Their eyes caught, a small laugh escaping as they brushed pastry flakes from each other's coats. That single touch, fleeting and unspoken, held more warmth than the food itself. The train doors slammed shut in unison, a deep metallic thud. Engines rumbled, vibrations running through the floor beneath my shoes. As we lurched forward, the platform began to slide away, leaving behind the glowing stall, the pigeons, the bustle. The city opened out into darkness, and the pasties' warmth lingered still, a reminder that even in the most hurried of places, there are pauses worth savouring. And beyond the next station, down in the suburbs, where the streets grew quieter, another kind of memory waited, the sound of a tinkling melody carried on summer air, promising sweetness that melted quicker than you could eat it. The first sound was always the chime, tinny and slightly distorted, floating down the quiet cul-de-sac like a promise. It was a late summer evening in Surrey in 1983. The sky painted soft pink and gold, the kind of light that made the tarmac glow and stretched the shadows of neat rows of semi-detached houses. Windows stood open to the warm air, curtains twitching as the familiar tune of Green Sleeves wound its way between the gardens. Within seconds, you could hear the thud of back doors, the quick patter of bare feet on gravel, and children's voices shrill with excitement. The ice cream van is here. The van itself came trundling slowly, its white paint dulled with years, decorated with faded stickers of cones, sundaes, and rocket-shaped lollies. Its roof bore a giant plastic cone, slightly tilted, glowing faintly in the last of the sunlight. The driver, a man with a kindly round face and a cigarette tucked behind his ear, always wore a short-sleeved shirt, no matter the weather. He pulled to a halt at the corner, the melody sputtering to a stop, and slid open the side window with a clatter. Instantly, a queue formed, children clutching coins, warmed from being held tightly in their fists. Mums and dads, following behind at a slower pace, chatting softly across the neat hedges that divided their gardens. I remember the smell most vividly, a mingling of petrol fumes from the idling van, the sweetness of syrup and wafers, the faint tang of tarmac still radiating heat from the day. Standing there, coins sweating in my palm, I could taste the decision before it was even made. Would it be a fab lolly, its chocolate coating studded with hundreds and thousands, or the classicer soft-serve cone crowned with a Cadbury flake? The legendary 99 gone on that evening, as the air cooled and the first moths hovered clumsily around the street lamps. It was the 99 that called. Watching the swirl of vanilla emerge from the silver nozzle was almost hypnotic, the soft peak curling upward in delicate layers. Then came the sharp crackle of the flake being pushed into place, leaning at an angle like a flag planted on a snowy mountain. He handed it over with a practiced nod, and the first lick was always the same. Cold, impossibly creamy, a sweetness that clung to the roof of your mouth. All around, the little rituals unfolded. A girl dropped her coin, scrambling in the dust before handing it up shyly. Two brothers argued loudly over who would get the last screwball, their mother intervening with a resigned sigh. A dog barked impatiently, straining at its lead, as though it too could smell the sugar in the air. And above it all, the hum of suburban life continued, the muffled crackle of a television through an open window, the rattle of cutlery being laid for tea, the soft clink of a neighbour tending his roses with a watering can. We ate quickly, knowing how fast the summer sun could turn ice cream to rivulets running down our wrists. My fingers grew sticky, the cone softening beneath the weight of the melting scoop. And I licked furiously, laughing with friends as we compared whose ice cream had survived longest. There was a kind of unspoken competition to reach the chocolate core of the flake before it tumbled out. A triumphant cheer rising from whoever managed to keep theirs intact. I remember glancing at my friend Sarah then, her face smeared with a white moustache of cream, her laughter carrying across the cul-de-sac. She caught me looking, pulled a silly face, and flicked a drop of ice cream at my arm. I swiped it away and retaliated with a grin, a small, fleeting moment of camaraderie that felt larger than the summer itself. These were the kinds of memories that slipped into the fabric of childhood without us even noticing, stitched together by the taste of sugar and the sound of a chime. As the last in the queue collected their treats, the driver stubbed out his cigarette on the edge of the window, flicked the stub into a tin, and slid the window shut with a bang. The van rumbled back into gear, crawling slowly up the road until the tune started again, faint and warbling, fading into the distance toward the next waiting street. We watched it go, standing in the golden haze of the evening, our cones already half finished, our bare feet blackened from the tarmac. Later, the wrappers and sticky napkins would find their way into bins. Our fingers scrubbed clean in kitchen sinks, but the taste lingered. It wasn't just ice cream. It was the arrival of summer itself, condensed into a ritual that turned the ordinary suburbs street into something magical for a few short minutes. Looking back, those vans were more than just purveyors of sweets. They were markers of time, reminders of how childhood was measured not by clocks or calendars, but by the sound of a jingle echoing down a quiet road, by the rush of excitement that could turn an ordinary Tuesday into something extraordinary. Even now, decades later, the faintest strains of that tinny tune can summon the same rush in my chest, as though I was still standing there, coins clutched tightly, waiting for my turn at the window. And as the summer nights drew to a close, replaced by the longer shadows of autumn, other rituals awaited, darker, louder, with neon lights buzzing above and laughter spilling into city streets, where the promise of food came not from a van but from glowing shop fronts at 2 in the morning. The first notes of Greensleeves floated into the air like a secret signal. Thin and metallic, the melody wound its way down the cul-de-sac, weaving through hedges and climbing roses, echoing off pebble-dashed walls. It was the summer of 1982 in Surrey, one of those rare English summers when the heat clung to everything, when the tarmac shimmered and softened under the afternoon sun, windows were thrown open, washing lines sagged under sun-bleached sheets, and the hum of lawn-mowers provided a steady drone in the background. But all of it stilled, for just a moment, at the sound of that chime. Children erupted into movement. Back doors slammed as we scrambled from living rooms and gardens. Coins clutched tight in our fists, bare feet slapping against the warm pavement. Some came running with hair still wet from paddling pools, others with football shirts sticking to their backs, their pockets jingling with loose change. The ice cream van was coming, and no one wanted to be last in the queue. It always looked the same. A white Ford Transit, its panels decorated with fading stickers of rocket lollies, screwballs, and chalk ices. A giant plastic cone, slightly tilted, stood proudly on its roof like a beacon. The driver would slow to a crawl, the tinny jingle stuttering to a stop as he pulled to the curb. With a grunt, he'd slide open the serving window, releasing a puff of sugary air tinged with petrol fumes. Behind the counter, you could glimpse tubs of sherbet, rows of bright-colored lollies, and the gleaming silver machine that conjured those perfect swirls of soft serve. I remember standing there, the pavement still warm beneath my toes, the smell of cut grass mixing with the faint tang of diesel. The coins sweated in my palm, 2 10-pence pieces and a 5-pence just enough for a 99. It was always the 99, a cone of vanilla crowned with a Cadbury flake. Some kids experimented with screwballs or cola lollies. But for me, nothing compared to that first cold lick of soft ice cream on a sweltering day. The ritual of watching was half the joy. The nozzle hissed softly as the ice cream curled into shape, smooth and pale as snow against the blazing sky. The driver's hand, steady from years of repetition, twisted just so, leaving a delicate peak at the top. Then came the Flakes slid in at a jaunty angle, its ridged chocolate threatening to crumble at the lightest touch. He'd pass it through the window, and I'd take it carefully, both hands wrapped around the cone as though it were treasure. The first taste was always too cold, numbing the tongue, but within seconds it melted into sweet creaminess, dripping faster than we could lick. We'd huddle in small clusters at the end of the cul-de-sac, each guarding our cones from both gravity and each other's jokes. Someone always managed to drop theirs. The splatter on the pavement instantly swarmed by wasps. The rest of us would gasp in mock sympathy before returning to our own, secretly relieved it hadn't been ours. On that day, I remember Sarah, the neighbour's daughter, standing beside me. Her cone was already lopsided, the flake sinking sideways. She giggled when I pointed it out, a little dimple flashing in her cheek. "Race you to the stick," she challenged, already licking furiously at the melting swirl. We laughed, our hands sticky, trying to stay ahead of the relentless sun. When her flake finally toppled, landing in the grass, she broke off half of mine without asking, and popped it in her mouth, eyes sparkling with triumph. I didn't even mind. Around us, the street hummed with life. A dog barked impatiently, whining for a taste of its owner's cone. Parents leaned on garden gates, sipping tea from mugs and swapping stories, their voices drifting like a soft background track. The smell of barbecue charcoal hung faintly in the air, carried from a few gardens down. For those few minutes, the cul-de-sac became more than just a row of houses. It was a gathering place, a theatre for laughter, sweetness, and a simple joy of summer. The van didn't linger long. Once the last child had handed over their coins and walked away licking carefully at a dripping cone, the driver slid the window shut with a bang. The chimes started again, sputtering to life as the van rolled on, its tune fading into the distance, toward another street where more children waited, coins in hand. We watched it go until it turned the corner and vanished. By then, the cones were already half-eaten, our fingers tacky, our lips smeared with cream. The sun was sinking lower, staining the sky with orange, and the sound of a cricket ball striking would carried faintly from the park. We finished our cones slowly, leaning against garden walls, the heat of the day still radiating from the pavement beneath us. The sweetness lingered on our tongues long after the ice cream was gone, leaving only the crunch of the last bite of conda, perfect ending, sugared and brittle. That night, after the street had quietened and the moths had begun their soft collisions against yellow porch lights, I lay in bed with the window open. The air smelled faintly of honeysuckle and warm earth, and somewhere in the distance, I thought I heard it, the faintest trace of a jingle, carried on the breeze. Perhaps it was only in my mind, but it brought a smile all the same. Because that was what the ice cream van meant. Anticipation, joy, a fleeting promise of sweetness that always seemed to arrive just when the day needed it most. And while summer would eventually fade, while the chimes would fall silent through the colder months, the memory remained etched in the taste of vanilla. The crunch of chocolate, the laughter of friends chasing each other barefoot down a sunlit cul-de-sac in Surrey. But summer could never last forever, and just a few years later another rhythm would replace it, the thrum of bass lines. Spilling from nightclubs, the glow of neon signs, and the scent of smoky meat drifting from shop fronts, where a different kind of midnight feast awaited.